Good morning, investors. You are now on KleverStock with me, Anujarya, serving you the latest morning bell updates. Kicking it off with the opening bell updates on our local market. The domestic market began Friday's session on a cautious note as traders stayed on the sidelines ahead of the tabling of Budget 2026 later in the day. The FPM KLCI opened 1.51 points lower at 1,628.16. reflecting subdued sentiment and an expectations of slow trading activity throughout the session. The muted tone mirrored the performance of the ringgit, which was little changed against the US dollar. As at 9 a.m., the local note stood at a middle rate of 4.2135, signaling that investors were waiting for policy clarity from the government before taking new positions. According to TA Securities, range-bound trade is likely to persist as market participants evaluate the upcoming Budget 2026 for possible sector-specific catalysts. Rakuten Trade, meanwhile, observed that foreign funds remained net sellers with cumulative net outflows of 878 million ringgit over the past 3 trading days. Now, despite this, the brokerage noted that domestic funds have been accumulating local equities and that retail participation appeared to be improving, supported by an uptick in trading volume above 4.7 million shares on Thursday. Top Glove emerged as the most actively traded stock following the company's announcement that it had returned to profitability on the back of stronger demand for latex gloves. The counter extended its rally, rising half a cent to 67.5 cents with 27.97 million shares changing hands. The positive sentiment also spilled over to other glove-related counters, although profit-taking was evident. Hartalega eased 2 cents to 1 ringgit and 28 cents, while Supermax slipped half a cent to 50 cents as traders locked in earlier gains amid optimism for the sector's recovery. And now moving on to local currency updates. The ringgit opened nearly unchanged against US dollar on Friday as investors stayed cautious ahead of the tabling of Budget 2026 later this afternoon. At 8 a.m., the local currency stood at 4.2140 or 4.2255 against the greenback, compared with Thursday's close of 4.2145 or 4.2185, reflecting subdued sentiment in early trade. Bank Muamalat Malaysia Beraha Chief Economist Dr. Muhammad Afzanizam Abdul Rashid said the dollar-ringgit pair is expected to remain range-bound, with Budget 2026 anticipated to provide greater clarity on Malaysia's fiscal direction. He noted that the government's fiscal consolidation efforts have already lowered the fiscal deficit to 4.2% of gross domestic product GDP in the first half of 2025, compared with 5.5% in the same period last year, keeping it on track to meet the 3.8% target for the full year. Now, externally, Afzanizam said the lingering US economic uncertainty continues to support the greenback, with investors responding to mixed signals over the Federal Reserve's interest rate outlook and limited economic data releases amid the ongoing US government shutdown. Now, at the opening, the ringgit traded higher against a basket of major currencies. It appreciated against euro to 4.8735 or 4.8868, strengthened vis-a-vis the Japanese yen to 2.7539 or 2.7616, and firmed against the British pound to 5.6055 or 5.6208. Against ASEAN currencies, the ringgit was mixed. It advanced versus the Thai baht to 12.8507 or 12.8924 and rose against Singapore dollar to 3.2433 or 3.2524. However, it was almost flat against the Philippine peso at 7.23 or 7.26 and little changed vis-a-vis the Indonesian rupiah at 254.3 or 255.1. Continuing with some local economic updates. As Malaysia continues its fiscal recalibration, a resurging debate over tax reform has drawn attention. The potential reintroduction of the Goods and Services Tax (GST). In a recent outlook, the head of the tax advisory at BDO Malaysia suggested that GST could make a return in the longer term as a more sustainable revenue base, though timing, rate and social impact remain key hurdles. Over the current tax regime, Malaysia relies on Sales and Service Tax (SST), with recent expansions to the scope of services and adjustments to rates designed to broaden the tax base. However, SST is often seen as limited by exemptions and narrower coverage, resulting in revenue volatility and constrained fiscal flexibility. In contrast, GST, or a value-added tax (VAT) style consumption tax, collects revenue at each stage of the supply chain and is considered more robust and predictable. Proponents argue that GST's broad base can help reduce reliance on volatile resources like commodity revenues and provide a more stable funding stream for state obligations such as infrastructure, health and social protection. But critics and policymakers alike warn that reintroducing GST carries risk. Malaysia Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim has previously cautioned against bringing GST back too early, citing fairness concerns for lower-income households who would likely face a disproportionate burden if daily essentials were taxed. The debate thus hinges not just on revenue but how equitable the tax is structured, including potential exemptions, compensatory transfers or phased implementation. Economists and tax experts suggest that if GST were to return, it would likely be introduced gradually with standard rates lower than historical ones and relief mechanism for basic goods and services. Thailand and Singapore, for instance, used tiered exemptions of zero rating on essentials to cushion vulnerable groups. Critically, reintroducing GST would require robust administrative infrastructure, from e-invoicing systems to strong audit capabilities and anti-evasion enforcement to ensure the system's integrity and reduce leakage. Malaysia's experience with SST expansion and tax enforcement adjust in recent years may provide some groundwork, but scaling up will present challenges. In the near term, GST is unlikely to return imminently. The government has maintained publicly that it is not planning to reintroduce it soon, instead favouring incremental tax reforms and SST optimization. Nevertheless, the idea remains on the table in policy discussions, especially as budget pressures mount and calls for sustainable revenue pathways intensify. Moving on to corporate news update. As the countdown to the tabling of Budget 2026 intensifies, small and medium enterprises (SMEs) are stepping into spotlight, urging the government to introduce bespoke support and tax incentives to ease cost burdens and stimulate expansion. Business associations and trade bodies have flagged that without sharper targeted measures, many SMEs may struggle to scale, innovate, or even survive in a tougher economic climate. Key voices among the SME community have laid out several demands tied to the next budget cycle. The Small and Medium Enterprises Association of Malaysia, Samantha, has called for a freeze on new or expanded taxes affecting SMEs, along with enhanced credit access, more generous investment allowances and incentives to drive intra-ASEAN trade. Industry watchers point to several areas where relief could make the most difference. A top concern is tax relief for capital expenditures and automation investments, which would allow SMEs to modernize without facing crushing upfront costs. Others suggest differentiated corporate tax brackets for micro and small firms, simplifying compliance requirements, and offering subsidies or rebates for digitalization and green initiatives. Some of these recommendations echo broader calls from trade groups for the 2026 budget to weave in support for technology adoption, skills upgrading and access to financing, especially for younger firms and those in underserved regions. Proponents argue that strengthening SMEs is not just about survival, it's a growth engine. The property, manufacturing and service sectors are likely to benefit from more vibrant domestic demand, with SMEs playing a central role in job creation and value chain participation. That said, policymakers face a balancing act with slowing oil revenue and growing fiscal constraints. Any additional relief must be carefully calibrated to preserve budget stability. But with Malaysia pursuing ambitious growth targets under the 13th Malaysia Plan and a Madani economy framework, integrating SME support into fiscal strategy is increasingly seen as prerequisite, not a luxury. And finally, wrapping up, we have major corporate developments and deals across Malaysia. IHH Healthcare Berhad is maintaining the offer price for its proposed acquisition of a 26% stake each in Fortis Healthcare Ltd and Fortis Mala Hospital Ltd, priced at 170 Indian rupees or 807 cents, 8 ringgit and 7 cents, and 17.6 rupees or 84 cents per share, respectively, despite a sharp rally in the shares of the two Indian hospital operators over the past several years. K&M Group Berhad has turned down a request from major shareholder MAA Group Berhad to hold an extraordinary general meeting to approve the sale of its entire stake in Deutsche K&M GmbH for 1.33 billion ringgit, citing regulatory concerns. Malaya United Industries Berhad has secured a term loan facility of 84.3 million ringgit granted by Singapore-based direct lending fund Indies Special Opportunities LV Ltd. Green Yield Berhad is facing renewed boardroom tensions as a shareholder group led by Tham Chong Sing has called for a new extraordinary general meeting to remove non-executive chairman Tham Phu Kyong, his brother. Last but not least, Sai Park Resources Berhad clarified that it has not been formally served with any adjudication claims from Solution Group Berhad regarding alleged unpaid sums totaling 2.5 million ringgit for solar projects in Kelantan and Terengganu. Well, that's a wrap for Morning Bell Updates with me, Anujarya, on KleverStock. Thank you for choosing us investors. Stay tuned for the next live all about Budget 2026 coming soon.